Elijah Stone hadn't touched a soul in 15 years. Not since the scarlet fever had stolen his Martha and left him a solitary sentinel on the dry Gulch Mountain. An unforgiving sentinel that cared nothing for the living or the dead. The relentless Arizona wind had become his only kin, and silence had wrapped around him like a shroud. Then, on a crisp October afternoon in 1884, a woman with auburn hair stumbled onto his porch, collapsing with words that shattered his world. "I'm your bride." Yet Elijah Stone had never penned a letter for a bride. The morning of her arrival had felt no different from the thousands that preceded it. Elijah woke before dawn in the narrow bed he'd occupied alone since 1869. The cabin was cold, the kind of mountain chill that seeped into bone and memory. Frost etched delicate patterns across the window pane, and he could see his own breath in the dim light. He swung his legs to the floor, rising without hesitation. Routine was his anchor, a bulwark against the rising tide of grief. He dressed in silence. The same faded chambray shirt, the same worn canvas trousers, the same scuffed boots with a heel long overdue for mending. He moved with a measured pace, for there was nowhere to be but the pasture and back again. He coaxed a fire to life in the iron stove with steady hands, tinder and kindling first, then heavier logs. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the crisp mountain air. He poured water into his chipped enamel pot, waiting for the boil, then brewed black coffee, strong enough to kick a mule. He drank it standing by the window, watching the sky bleed from inky black to bruised purple, then to pale gold over the Sierra Madre peaks. He did not think of Martha, not directly. That kind of thinking hurt too much. Instead, he tallied his cattle in his head. 14 head, 2 calves born in spring, a fence broken on the north line, the barn roof leaking, always work to be done. Work was better than remembering. He reached for his hat and stepped toward the door. That was when he heard it, a sound that did not belong. Wheels. Elijah froze, his hand on the latch. No one came up his mountain anymore, not since he'd made it clear he wanted no visitors. The only man who dared was Barnaby Finch from Vista Creek, and Elijah had driven him off 2 years ago. The sound grew louder, wagon wheels grinding over ruts, a horse breathing hard. Elijah snatched his Winchester from beside the door and stepped outside. The morning air bit sharp, frost dusting the grass like scattered glass. And coming up the narrow trail toward his cabin was a passenger coach. Not a supply wagon, not a rancher's cart, a passenger coach. The horses were lathered with sweat, their driver looking tired enough to fall from his seat. He pulled the team to a stop in Elijah's yard and climbed down slowly. "This the Stone place?" the driver called. Elijah kept his rifle low but visible. "Depends who's asking. Got a delivery for Elijah Stone." "You him?" "I don't order deliveries." The driver gave a tired shrug and walked to the back of the coach. "Well, someone did. Paid good money, too. Philadelphia to here." "Philadelphia." The driver opened the coach door and held out a hand. "Come on, miss. We're here." Elijah's breath hitched. A pale hand appeared first, thin fingers gripping the driver's palm. Then a woman stepped down. She looked to be around 40. Her hair was a rich auburn, pulled back in a loose bun that had mostly unraveled during her journey. Dust clung to her plain dark blue traveling dress. Her face was etched with exhaustion, but her green eyes were clear and defiant. She stood in his yard as if she'd crossed the entire world to get there. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she took 2 shaky steps toward him. Her legs gave out. Elijah dropped the rifle and lunged forward just in time to catch her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and trembling breath. She smelled of dust and travel and something faintly floral. He hadn't held a woman in 15 years. The shock of it nearly made him pull away. "I'm sorry," she whispered weakly. You're about to fall," Elijah said roughly. "That's what you are." She tried to stand, but swayed again. He caught her a second time and did not let go. "Bring her things," Elijah told the driver. Inside the cabin, he laid her gently on the old horsehair sofa near the stove, the same sofa where Martha once sat reading on winter nights. He pushed the thought away. The driver placed a small canvas duffel and a worn valise by the door. She's been traveling near a week, the man said. Kept saying she had to reach the stone ranch. Had a letter. A letter. The driver handed him an envelope, worn from handling. Elijah's name was written across the front in careful script, not his handwriting. She read it over and over, the driver added, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Elijah waited until the driver left before opening it. The words inside made his stomach turn cold. It was a proposal written as if by him, signed with his name. It invited a woman named Eleanor Vance from Philadelphia to travel west and become his wife. Elijah's hands tightened on the paper. He had written no such letter. Behind him, a soft voice spoke. "Is it really you?" He turned. The woman was sitting up now, her eyes fixed on him with desperate hope. "Are you Elijah Stone?" "Yes," he said slowly, "but I did not write this." She stared at him as if he had struck her. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said. "You wrote to me. You said you wanted a wife. You said I would be treated with respect. I did not write that letter." Her face drained of color. "No," she whispered. "No, you have to be mistaken. I gave up everything. I sold what little I had. Her voice broke. "I cannot go back." Elijah saw something deeper than embarrassment in her eyes. Not just disappointment. Fear. "Miss Vance," he said carefully. "Someone used my name. I do not know why." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I answered an advertisement. I needed to leave Philadelphia. Your letter was the only kind one." Kind. Elijah swallowed hard. He had not been kind in a long time. "When did you last eat?" he asked quietly. She blinked, confused by the question. "I cannot remember." He moved to the stove and began pulling out what little food he had. Hardtack, dried jerky, fruit preserves. He placed a plate in her hands. She ate slowly at first, then faster. He watched from across the room, uneasy at the sight of another living soul inside his cabin. After she finished, she looked at him again. "You could have turned me away," she said softly. "You collapsed in my yard," he replied. "Well, what kind of man would I be if I left you there?" She held his gaze. "The kind I'm used to." He did not ask what she meant. "You can take the bed tonight," he said instead. "I will sleep out here." Her eyes widened. "I cannot take your bed." "You can and you will." She hesitated, then nodded. The fight seemed to drain out her all at once. "Just for a few days," she said. "Please let me rest. Then I will leave." He should have said no. Instead, he heard himself say, 3 days. Relief washed over her face. He showed her to the bedroom. She stepped inside quietly, as if afraid the walls might reject her. When the door closed, Elijah stood alone in the hallway, holding the forged letter. There was only one man who would have done this, Barnaby Finch. Barnaby had begged him for years to stop living like a ghost, and had said more than once that Elijah was wasting away on this mountain. Elijah clenched his jaw. "Damn you, Barnaby," he muttered. But anger did not change the fact that Eleanor Vance was now sleeping in his bed, exhausted and frightened, with nowhere else to go. That night, Elijah lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling. He listened to the soft sound of her breathing in the next room. The cabin felt different, not quieter, not louder, just alive. The next morning, he woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, his heart stopped. It felt like stepping back 15 years. He sat up quickly. Eleanor stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair braided neatly. Sunlight fell across her auburn hair like fire. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "You fed me." It seemed fair. He stared at her. No one had stood in his kitchen in 15 years. They ate together at the small table by the window. "I believe you," she said suddenly. "About what? That you did not write the letter?" He exhaled slowly. "So where does that leave us?" he asked. Eleanor folded her hands. "I have a proposal." He raised an eyebrow. "Not marriage," she said quickly, color rising in her cheeks. "An arrangement. Let me stay 1 month. I will cook, clean, mend, help with the ranch in exchange for shelter, separate rooms. No expectations." He almost laughed. "A month." She met his gaze steadily. "I cannot go back to Philadelphia. Please." There was again a fear. He studied her face. She was not foolish, not weak, just worn down. Finally, he nodded once. 1 month. But we ride into town tomorrow. I want answers." She let out a breath she had been holding. "Agreed." He extended his hand. Elijah. She took it. Eleanor. Her fingers were warm in his. And for the first time in 15 years, Elijah Stone did not feel entirely alone. The next morning dawned clear and sharp, the kind of mountain morning that showed no mercy to doubt. Elijah hitched the wagon in silence while Eleanor stood beside him, her hands folded tight in front of her. She looked pale but steady. They rode down the mountain trail toward Vista Creek with the wind cutting across their faces. Elijah kept his eyes on the road. Eleanor watched the town grow closer with something that looked like dread. Vista Creek was small, only one long street lined with wood buildings, a church at one end and a saloon at the other. Everyone noticed when a stranger arrived. They noticed Eleanor. Heads turned as Elijah drove into town. Whispers followed them like shadows. He pulled the wagon in front of Finch's General Emporium. The sign above the door read Finch and Sons, though Barnaby had no sons. Elijah climbed down first and helped Eleanor from the seat. She hesitated only a second before taking his hand. Inside the store, the smell of sawdust and oil filled the air. Barnaby stood behind the counter, writing in a ledger. "You want to turn around?" Elijah said. Barnaby froze slowly. He looked up. His eyes landed on Eleanor, then on Elijah. He sighed. "Ah, El. You wrote the letter," Elijah said flatly. Barnaby rubbed his beard. "Yes." Eleanor stood very still beside Elijah. "You forged his name." "I did." "Why?" Elijah demanded. Barnaby stepped around the counter. "Because you've been dying up there, Elijah. 15 years of silence and ghosts. I was tired of watching you fade. So, you dragged a stranger across the country on a lie." Barnaby looked at Eleanor, and for the first time, there was regret in his eyes. "I read her letter to the agency. She was asking for a fresh start. Said she needed a decent man. You're decent, Elijah, whether you believe it or not." "You had no right," Elijah said. "Maybe not, but I'd do it again." Eleanor spoke quietly. "You used me." Barnaby nodded. "I did, and I'm sorry for that. But I hoped you might save each other." The words hung in the air. Elijah felt anger, but underneath it was something else. The truth that Eleanor had already changed his cabin in ways he did not want to admit. "We made an agreement," Eleanor said. "1 month, I help at the ranch." Barnaby looked surprised. "You're staying for now?" Barnaby studied Elijah. "And you're allowing it?" "It's none of your concern." Barnaby held up his hands. "All right, I won't interfere again." But as Elijah turned to leave, Barnaby added softly, "You don't look like a dying man anymore." Elijah did not answer. Outside, Eleanor climbed back into the wagon. The whispers followed them again as they drove away. "People are staring," she said. "Let them. They think I'm something improper. They think too much." She looked at him. "Does it bother you?" No, that was not entirely true. Back at the ranch, they fell into a routine. Eleanor woke early and made coffee, and she cleaned corners Elijah had stopped seeing. She mended shirts that had been frayed for years. She scrubbed the floors until the wood showed its grain again. Outside, Elijah worked the fence while she brought him water in the afternoons. "You do not have to work so hard," he told her one day. "I do," she replied. "If I am not useful, what am I?" "You are not here to earn your existence." She looked at him strangely. "That is not how the world works. It is how this ranch works." That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The sky burned orange and purple. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered. "It is. You've been alone here all this time." "Yes." "Did it make the pain easier?" Elijah thought about Martha's last breath. About the empty bed. "No," he said honestly. "It just made it quiet." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Sometimes quiet can be worse." Days passed, then weeks. Eleanor's presence settled into the cabin like light through a window. She laughed when the chickens chased her. She hummed while she cooked. She asked questions about the cattle and listened to his answers. And Elijah found himself talking more than he had in years. One evening by the fire, Eleanor finally told him about Philadelphia. "There was a man," she said, staring into the flames. "His name was Silas Croft. He owned the bank where I worked as a ledger clerk." Elijah's jaw tightened. "He promised marriage," she continued. "Said he loved me. I believed him." "And he was married?" "Yes." Her voice did not shake. It was steady, like she had repeated this story too many times to herself. When his wife discovered the truth, oh, she made sure everyone knew. I lost my job, my room, my name. No one would hire me. Elijah felt anger rise inside him. He said if I stayed quiet, he would take care of me. Eleanor said bitterly. But I would have been hidden owned, and you refused. Yes. She looked at him then, eyes bright with pain. That is why I needed to leave Philadelphia. That is why I answered the advertisement. I thought I could start over somewhere no one knew me, and instead you found a man who did not write the letter. She gave a small smile. Yes, instead I found you. Silence filled the room. Do you regret it? He asked. Not yet. That answer stayed with him. As the month drew closer to its end, the air between them changed. Small touches lingered longer. Their hands brushed over the same tools. Their shoulders bumped in narrow doorways. One night in the barn, Eleanor struggled to lift a saddle. Elijah took it from her. You do not have to prove yourself every moment. I am not proving myself, she said quickly, then softer. Maybe I am. He stepped closer. You are not a burden. She met his eyes. You are counting the days. He froze. I was, he admitted at first. And now, he hesitated. Now I am not sure I want you to leave. The words settled between them like something fragile. Eleanor's breath caught. You do not mean that. Edo. Her eyes filled with tears. She did not let them fall. Elijah, I cannot survive hoping for something that will be taken away. He understood that fear. Then do not hope, he said quietly. Just stay. For what? For this. He did not know how else to name it. That night, sitting by the fire, the truth finally broke free. I love you, Elijah said, the words rough and unfamiliar. Eleanor stared at him. You do not have to say it back, he added quickly. But it is true. She stepped toward him and pressed her hands to his chest. I love you too, she whispered. I was just afraid to admit it. He kissed her then, slow at first. Careful. 15 years of loneliness and 1 month of growing closeness met in that single moment. When they pulled apart, everything had changed. But the mountain did not allow peace for long. 3 days later, riders came. Elijah saw them from the yard. 3 men with hard faces and colder eyes. The leader stepped forward. We're looking for a woman from Philadelphia. Auburn hair, green eyes. Elijah's hand went to his rifle. Never heard of her. The man smiled. Her name is Eleanor Vance. She stole from her employer $10,000 in jewelry. Eleanor stepped out of the cabin behind Elijah. I stole nothing, she said. The man tipped his hat. Mr. Croft says otherwise. The name hit like a gunshot. You tell Mr. Croft I am not coming back, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. He's coming himself, the man replied. With papers. They rode off, leaving dust and threat behind. Eleanor's knees weakened. Elijah caught her. He found me, she whispered. He looked toward the trail, jaw tight. Let him come, Elijah said. This time you are not alone. Croft arrived 3 days later in a polished black carriage that did not belong in a town like Vista Creek. The horses were tall and groomed. The brass on the carriage shone in the sun. He stepped down dressed in a fine suit, boots without dust, hair slicked back like he had never known hardship. He looked like success. He looked like power. And when his eyes found Eleanor standing beside Elijah outside the marshal's office, he smiled like he had already won. Eleanor, he said smoothly, as if greeting an old friend. You look well. Eleanor's hand tightened around Elijah's. I am Mrs. Stone now, she replied. Croft's smile flickered for only a second before returning. Of course, a quick marriage. How convenient. Marshal Jericho stood at the doorway, holding a folder of documents. His expression was troubled. He's filed formal charges, the marshal said quietly. The warrant is valid. Elijah's chest burned. On what proof? Sworn statements, Croft answered calmly. Witnesses who saw Eleanor taking money and jewelry before she fled Philadelphia. It's a lie, Eleanor said. Croft stepped closer, lowering his voice. Return what you stole, and I will make this disappear. Come back with me quietly. I took nothing, Eleanor repeated, and I would rather die than belong to you. Croft's eyes hardened. Marshal, he said coolly. Please, Marshal Jericho swallowed. Eleanor Stone, I have to place you under arrest pending the judge's arrival. The sound of metal around her wrists made Elijah see red. You will not take her, he said. Eleanor turned to him, tears in her eyes, but her voice steady. Let them. We fight this the right way. He wanted to refuse, wanted to break the handcuffs and drag her back to the mountain, but she nodded once, asking for trust. So he stepped aside. They locked her in the small town jail while Croft watched with satisfaction. 3 days, the marshal told Elijah. The circuit judge arrives then. 3 days. 3 days felt like a lifetime. Elijah did not leave town. He sat outside Eleanor's cell for hours, holding her hand through the bars. We will find a way, he promised. There is a way, Eleanor whispered on the second night. I did not tell you everything. She told him then about Thomas, about the man she had loved before Croft destroyed his work and drove him from Philadelphia. About the papers Thomas had copied that proved Croft had been stealing money from the bank owner for years. I gave those papers to a nun, Eleanor said. Reverend Mother Agnes. She believed me. She kept them safe. Elijah's heart pounded. If we get those papers, we can expose him. He will try to stop it. Then we move faster. That night, Elijah sent a telegram to Philadelphia. The reply came the next afternoon. Documents are on the way. Arriving tomorrow. Trust in God. Croft must have sensed something was wrong. That evening, while Eleanor was being held at the hotel under watch, a bottle filled with kerosene crashed through the window of her room. Fire swallowed the curtains in seconds. Elijah had been outside speaking with Barnaby when he heard the glass shatter. He ran. Smoke poured from the window. Flames licked across the walls. He did not think. He kicked in the door and rushed inside. Eleanor was coughing, disoriented, trapped between fire and smoke. He wrapped his coat around her and dragged her toward the hallway. The ceiling beam cracked. For a moment, he thought they would both die there. Then, hands grabbed them from behind. Barnaby and 2 ranch hands pulled them into the street just as the roof collapsed. The hotel burned against the night sky while the town formed a bucket line. Croft was gone. His enforcers were gone. They knew the evidence was coming, Barnaby said, soot streaking his face. This was their last move. Eleanor clung to Elijah, shaking. He will never stop, she whispered. He will, Elijah said quietly, because tomorrow we end it. The next morning, Reverend Mother Agnes arrived in a plain wagon, dust on her black habit, but fire in her eyes. She carried a leather case. Inside were ledgers, copied letters, bank statements, proof of embezzlement, proof of stolen funds, proof that Croft had been bleeding his employer dry for 5 years. Marshal Jericho examined the documents in stunned silence. This is enough, he said finally. More than enough. The circuit judge arrived that afternoon. Croft returned too, as if confident his charm would smooth everything over. But when the evidence was placed before the judge, when Reverend Mother Agnes testified, when Elijah and Eleanor stood side by side and told the full truth, the mask fell from Croft's face. The judge's voice echoed in the small courtroom. All charges against Eleanor Stone are dismissed. Eleanor's knees nearly gave out from relief. And based on the evidence presented, the judge continued, a warrant will be issued for Silas Croft on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted arson. Croft's composure shattered. This is absurd, he shouted. She is lying. They are lying. But no one was listening anymore. One of Croft's enforcers tried to slip out the back door. Marshal Jericho and 2 deputies blocked the exit. Croft was placed in irons in the same room where Eleanor had stood days earlier. As he was led past her, his eyes burned with hatred. You think this is victory? He hissed. You will regret crossing me. Eleanor lifted her chin. I stopped being afraid of you the day I left Philadelphia. He was taken away under guard, bound for trial, and the town exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. Vista Creek chose its side. Mrs. O'Malley hugged Eleanor in the street. Barnaby clapped Elijah on the back hard enough to bruise him. You stubborn fool, Barnaby said with a grin. Told you she'd save you. Eleanor looked at Elijah through tears and laughter mixed together. We did this, she said. Together. They rode back to the ranch that evening as husband and wife in truth, not just in words. The mountains looked different somehow, less like a prison, more like home. Weeks passed. Croft was convicted in Philadelphia. Word reached Vista Creek that he would spend many years in prison. The threat was over. Peace came slowly, like spring after a harsh winter. Eleanor's sewing business grew. Women from town brought dresses and coats to the ranch, where children ran across the yard when they came to visit. The cabin no longer echoed with silence. Laughter filled it. One morning, nearly a year later, Eleanor stood at the window again. But this time, her hand rested over her stomach. Elijah noticed the glow in her face before she even spoke. "We're going to have a child," she said softly. For a moment, he could not breathe. 15 years of emptiness collapsed under the weight of that single sentence. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. "I thought I had lost everything," he whispered against her hair. "But I was only waiting for you." She smiled up at him, eyes shining. "And I thought I was ruined," she said. "But I was only lost." Outside, the Arizona wind moved gently through the grass. The fence had been mended. The barn roof no longer leaked. And inside the once lonely cabin, a man who had not touched a soul in 15 years held his wife close and felt something he had almost forgotten existed: hope. Their story had begun with a lie, but it had ended with truth, with love, and with a future neither of them had believed possible. And on that mountain where silence once ruled, the sound of laughter carried farther than the wind.